Today we're going to be talking about a little car combat game that may have pushed Sony to create the Twisted Metal 3 that we know today. It's a game series that inspired the band Gorillaz, and it's a game series that introduced a whole generation of gamers to car combat regardless of their platform. And it's a series we're going to be talking about with the last remaining developer, David Goodrich.
Vigilante 8 blows up.
Twisted Metal was having a good run in the late 90s with its breakout entry and the sequel that followed. But after 1996, development would switch hands to a new studio, and the following two entries that came along with it would garnish a lot of mixed reception. Now, whether or not that mixed reception was actually justified is something that I covered when I ranked them, but there's no denying that it left some fans of the series feeling pessimistic. And if they had decided to start looking for a little car combat fix elsewhere, they would have found a little series making its debut that went by Vigilante 8.
Two other auto combat games came out that year. It was Road Trip and Twisted Metal 3, along with V8, were all being shown at E3. And recently, I found out from one of the Twisted Metal 3 devs that the only reason that version of Twisted Metal exists is because Sony saw Vigilante 8, an early disc, at their offices, because they have to look at it and prove all games going onto their system. Basically, they were just like, oh crap, there's a new auto combat game coming onto the system and we don't have a Twisted Metal in the works. So they threw Twisted Metal 3 into production, like right on the spot once they saw V8. So I always joke around saying, I also created Twisted Metal 3.
Vigilante 8 would be developed by Luxoflux, a team of just 5 developers, one of which we'll be talking to today.
I am the only one on the team who played Twisted Metal. Peter, Adrian, Jeremy, they weren't really gamers in that sense. Peter had a very interesting philosophy that actually gave me pause back in the day. He doesn't like to play other games or competitors, so he cannot be accused of copying them. I, however, had played the crap out of Twisted Metal 1, 2, and 3.
Now, before we go any further, I just want to kind of explain the significance of David and why it's so important that he's in this video. He's the last remaining developer that's actually in the industry, and he was a key part of the development of this game. Not only that, but he's involved in the community, and he still plays and discusses this game to this day. He was in the development process of countless games, including Twisted Metal Small Brawl, which is actually a video we covered on the channel, and he actually was featured in it. And he's graciously allotted me his time again to talk about the Vigilante 8 series, which is a very special one. I'm very grateful that he was able to be a part of this video, and I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, be sure to check him out after this. Vigilante 8 came out looking like this Mad Max inspired action thriller set in the 70s. It's a pretty wild aesthetic, so I was curious to know how it was even conceptualized. Well, it turns out that Vigilante 8 is a spiritual successor to a car combat game called Interstate 76, a big box PC game that was developed by an in-house team at Activision. But this wasn't the original plan.
After the success of I-76, and I mean successful for a PC game at the time, they wanted to make a console version of I-76. That original team was busy doing another project, I forget which one it was. They hired on Luxoflux to make the console version of it. As the game was getting built, organically the levels became smaller and smaller because that's all the PlayStation 1 could handle. It became very action-packed.
They were originally hired to port Interstate 76 to the PlayStation, but as the development went further along, the plan started to change.
Plus, Peter and Adrian wanted to put some more futuristic high-action weapons on the car that were a bit different than I-76, so he kind of approached Activision, from what I understand, and said, hey, this is nothing like I-76. It's turning out to be a completely different experience, a great one, but completely different. Can we make this our own thing?
The visuals of Interstate 76 are pretty dated by today's standards, but between the afros and handlebar mustaches combined with the vehicles and funky soundtrack, there was no mistaking where Vigilante 8 got its inspiration.
John Torque is Taurus from I-76, and Convoy is Groove Champion. We kept a lot of the original stuff and just kind of made it our own, added flashier paint jobs, full destructibility, thus V8 was born.
We'll come back to that destructibility. If you're used to the way that Twisted Metal sets up its story and games here, you're in for quite a surprise. The intro video starts with the characters from the game in this Mad Max style scene. Convoys rolling down the road with weapons strapped to the cars, warehouses full of cargo being loaded up, and the opposition being wiped out. But this is more than just fluff for the spectacle of an intro video. This is actually cohesive to the main story. A terrorist by the name of Sideburn is hired by the oil conglomerate Omar to destroy its US competition, aiming to create a countrywide monopoly on the oil industry. So it's basically real life. But Sideburn can't do it alone, so he forms himself a little gang known as the Coyotes to help him. But he's gonna run into a little bit of trouble because another group known as the Vigilantes, led by a good old trucker boy that goes by Convoy, are aiming to put a stop to them. So you have Sideburn and the Coyotes facing up against Convoy and the Vigilantes, kind of like a little cops and robbers standoff situation. And this is a story element that leads itself into the fundamental gameplay of Vigilante 8.
Looks like you really stepped in it this time, hoss.
When you think of Twisted Metal, you typically think of an all-out deathmatch where it's every man for himself. But in Vigilante 8, there's no magic man giving out free wishes. This is reality, and the reality of it is that there's more oil at stake than the Gulf of Mexico can hold. And in Vigilante 8, you can choose to either be the angel that protects it, or you can have that demon inside you that makes you want to do some pretty bad stuff. Once you pick your character, you can jump into your standard split screen arcade mode, aka deathmatch, which for redundancy's sake, we'll talk about a little bit later. And of course, your story mode. In the quest mode, aka the story mode, you go on a road trip through a series of levels that'll be arranged a little bit differently depending on who you're playing with. You'll see this map of sorts when you're first starting the game that's routing out your path that you'll be taking across the country, and it's a small little detail, but it does something to my brain that just adds a little bit more immersion. You'll have to eliminate the opposition as well as defend or destroy an objective based on your alliance.
The quest mode originally wasn't planned. This game was going to be purely arena based. At I want to say the last 3 or 4 months of the development, Activision determined that the game was too short, and they said, hey, what can you do to give us more gameplay hours so we can put that on the front of the game disc? What do we do in the game already we can turn into a quest? Well, we blow stuff up or we don't blow stuff up, and that's literally where quest mode came from. If you're a bad guy, you blow shit up, and if you're a good guy, you don't blow shit up.
It's a small touch, but it makes the levels feel like real environments that you're encouraged to interact with, and for its first entry, there's a lot going on in the levels here. For example, you can ride the ski lift in the ski resort and destroy it, as well as the individual cable supports for the lift. In fact, destruction was a focal point in Vigilante 8.
But our gimmick was everything was destructible in the environment, and I think we were one of the first ones to do it. Don't quote me, but I think so, because unlike other games where you could, kind of blow up a car, blow up a building, we could also blow up the ground. Like every single thing in that environment could be destroyed in some way.
Whether it's riding the blimp in Vegas or dodging planes in the aircraft graveyard, there's hidden areas and interactive elements in every level that keeps things interesting. You also get a report card at the end of each game showing how bad you are at it.
Not bad, but still not slick.
This includes objective completion and time played, as well as how many whammies you hit on your opponents. I guess I should talk about the gameplay now so it'll help explain what whammies are. When you first select your character, you get a preview of their vehicle and the stats they offer. I was a little confused by this. Okay, so this car gets more crosshair, but this one gets more wrench. But maybe I should go with the car that has the most speedometer. Yeah, you'll learn that in Vigilante 8, they like to use a lot of cute logos in place of words. Oh, you want to change the difficulty? Do you really know how hard it is to select premium gas? The first thing I immediately noticed when I booted up a game in Vigilante 8 was that the handling felt surprisingly good. Vehicles corner pretty tight and offer different advantages depending on who you pick. Clyde's truck, that's totally not a Chevy Blazer, seems like it handles mountainous areas and takes on excessive damage a little better than a smaller vehicle like Chassis Sports Car that's definitely not a 67 Cobra that'll corner around tight bends and speed away from a firefight with ease.
One day I was driving around with Molo, and I see Sheila, and I just go driving up and ram her super hard, and it sends her flying. And I'm just like, yeah, the ram damage is insane. On Molo, I practically killed Sheila in one hit. And Adrian, the programmer, looks over and goes, yeah, there's no ram damage in the game. And I was like, can we have ram damage? And he goes, let me think about it. So I went to lunch and I come back, and he's like, okay, here's what ram damage does. And he programmed it while I was out getting food for the office at KFC down the street. But there was all the other parameters there under it too, like speed, acceleration, stopping, and then overall mass of the vehicle, which tied into ram damage. So I started tuning all that and then looking up realistic statistics of like how much a bus weighs, how much a Doom buggy weighs, and plugged in all these parameters and just played it over and over again and just tuned them until it felt right as best I could with our current physics model, because V8 does some weird things.
That being said, the fight that you'll be taking up with gravity in this game is a losing battle regardless of the vehicle you're using.
Face quick!
Every car going up a steep ramp in Vigilante 8 is like a kid's Barbie Jeep trying to make it up a wet driveway. There's plenty of areas in the maps where there will be a little bit of verticality separating you from a spot with a good item, and it is a chore to navigate these areas. A lot of games from this time period Twisted Metal included, have these precision driving spots where you have to hit them perfectly with just the right amount of speed, and it just doesn't work most of the time because you're fighting the weird 90s engine gravity, the inconsistent frame rate, and the drunken driving physics that leave you swerving all over the road when you're just trying to get that input perfectly straight with the road. Yeah, I know I just got done praising the handling in the beginning, but once you start playing it for a while, you'll notice this dead-on center feeling that makes it a little hard to navigate the maps, especially when you're slamming handbrake turns and dodging missiles. The handling feels like I'm going 70 down the highway with shot control arms while God flips the gravity switch on and off, but he's doing it fast enough to where you don't really notice it all that consistently. That's probably the weirdest comparison to driving that I've ever made in a video game, but you're not just driving, of course. If you've ever played a Twisted Metal title, this will feel a little bit familiar to you. You have a machine gun with unlimited ammo, and it'll have to cool down if you overuse it, and you have a selection of different rockets and specials to use. Unlike Twisted Metal, however, you'll notice a little crosshair that turns green over the enemies when you're using most of these items. This means that it's a lock-on weapon that'll automatically go for whatever's in its crosshairs. If it's grayed out, that means you'll have to use a little manual precision when you fire. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, that just seems a little too easy. The game does all the work for me? Well, not quite, because the developers decided to put this little thing into the gameplay called depth. And we're not talking critical depth, the boat combat game that I covered in my Twisted Metal developer games video.
Our combat system was very bland. I saw what they were doing, and for Twisted Metal, I was just like, there's no way we can compete unless we get a meteor combat system in there. And Adrian like, okay, and Peter's like, all right.
For example, one of my favorite things to do when I start a game in Twisted Metal is collect as many weapons as possible and then spam everything in my inventory on the first person I see to knock them out. When I tried to do this in Vigilante 8, I got slapped with a reminder that this isn't a Twisted Metal. For starters, you can only hold 3 weapon pickups at a time, and I think there's about 6 or so weapon pickups if you include the specials.
The original build of V8 you could get all 5 weapons. I wanted players to go, I really want the cannon, I really want missiles to go after, this enemy, as opposed to, oh, I have all of them, I don't care, I'm just going to drive around with everything. Like it completely erased interesting choice in combat.
But what makes them interesting is the way they can be used. Of course, you can just fire them off as normal with a single press, but there's also button combinations unique to each weapon that'll perform special moves with them, almost like what you would do in a fighting game.
Peter said, don't copy Twisted Metal. And I said, okay, I won't copy them, which kind of boxed me in a corner. So I played a lot of fighting games back then. So I like Tekken and Street Fighter. And I was like, oh, we'll do combos like that in order to get these extra layers out of the weapon system. Little did I know, people like Dave Jaffe were copying Mortal Kombat, but he hadn't put those in interviews yet. So I was copying a fighting system, and he was copying a fighting system at the same time.
Also, like in a fighting game, you can put your defeated enemies in a stun state that allows you to use these special combos as Mortal Kombat-like finishers on them.
I got a little bit of Mortal Kombat in there too with the totals. And then the one extra system I stuck in there that I thought was, even to this day, I really like, was the whammy system.
The most notable gameplay element, in my opinion, has to be the whammies. God, I hate that word. The enemies in Vigilante 8 can definitely take a hit, so it's in your best interest to whittle down their health as quickly as possible. Did you guys know that whittle and whittle are 2 different words? Didn't realize that until I was writing this script.
How that came about is I was playing Sheila, and I had a ton of weapons on my car, and I roll up on Molo and pin him in a corner and just empty everything I got on him. He's done. He's dead. Like, onto the next car. And he rolls away with a pixel of health. I could barely see his health bar. He rolls away, gets a shield that was right next to him, drives off, gets a wrench, drives off, gets another wrench, and then he was like back up to full health. And it was just like, this is never going to end.
Hitting them with everything in your arsenal is only going to do so much damage, but if you're a little strategic with it, you can hit them with multiple attacks at once to deliver a whammy.
So I came up with the system that kind of felt like how it should have felt. If you can land 2 different attacks or more in, I think, a split second, it doubles the damage of each consecutive attack. So it goes like double damage, triple damage, quadruple damage.
One of my favorite things to do when I start a game in Twisted Metal is collect as many weapons as possible and then spam everything in my inventory on the first person I see to knock them out.
This acts as a damage multiplier to whatever weapon achieved the whammy, special weapons and weapon combos included. Embarrassingly, I didn't realize this for a while when I was playing the game, but you can actually use these special combos regardless of if they're the weapon that's selected on the car. If it's attached to the car, you can use it even if it's not selected, and then you can hit them with the weapon that you do have selected for the whammies. Pretty neat design choice. I love gameplay elements like this that are simple on the surface, but offer depth that a skilled player will use to their advantage.
So if you're a skilled player, you can kill pretty much anybody with the right combo. If you can get them all in rapid succession.
It's like button mashing in a fighting game. You can completely suck at the game and you'll still have a good time, as long as you don't take it online. The more I think about the combo system, the more that Vigilante 8 just becomes a fighting game in my head.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of game design. I was like, is this frustrating? Okay, how can I make it less frustrating? And that was my goal there.
So what you're saying is Twisted Metal doesn't have much depth to it.
I would never say that about Twisted Metal.
There are counters to these attacks, however. You can pick up these green diamonds in the map which deploy a shield whenever you take damage, as well as this weird orange thing that'll jam the enemy's ability to target you with homing weapons. And if you take too much damage, you can find wrenches in the map that'll bump up your health. So I guess that explains the wrench meter in the character selection. You'll want to pick up these items with caution, however, because I felt like items in this game could be a little hard to come by. I found myself either running out of useful items to pick up, or the items I wanted were in a spot that was just too much of a pain to get to. The AI will also be scavenging for the same items around the map, so if you don't know the map layouts as good as the AI, you can expect to get f***ed. You'll probably get f***ed by the computer either way, because the AI in this game can be deceptively hard.
Oh no, I think I broke a nail.
In the quest mode, you'll start off simple with one guy, but in the following levels, that one guy will turn into 3, and then just to put the icing on the cake, there'll be a boss battle at the end. I guess the rest of the game couldn't answer a phone because you never get any companions to help you in these levels, despite being allied with a team. Unless you're playing split screen co-op, of course.
Originally, if you wanted to have team-based gameplay, which we never got in, and you only had 3 people, I did want to have an AI companion to kind of pad out that teammate that was missing, but we never got that far. And with a 5-man team in a basically 1 year to do this game, it was tight.
Sometimes it felt like the AI was targeting me from across the map, and sometimes I felt like they couldn't find their way around the map. The AI could be a bit of a mixed bag, but that's pretty much par for the course in any game from this era. The AI has to play by the same rules as you, so they can't magically regenerate health or spam rockets without picking them up first. So it'll at least give you a somewhat fair challenge during your quest.
I know a lot of people complain about Twisted Metal, and I've even seen on some of my streams or others where they're just like, oh my god, Beeswax has so many bees, they're infinite, these games cheat. And then if I happen to be in chat, I'll be like, actually no, he plays by the same rules. He's just been going around picking stuff up while you've been fighting some of the other AI. You can see this if you ever put it on highest difficulty. Because their fire rate is so high, they will run out of weapons pretty quickly, and then you'll see them riding around the level looking for new pickups and stuff.
The quest mode won't be winning any awards for a narrative blockbuster, but you can tell there was some effort put in here to integrate it into a cohesive story. The start of each quest level gives you a backstory for what's taking place, and most of the levels start off with your rivals driving off of rooftops or swerving around corners in the beginning, which I thought was a cute little touch. And your quest mode, of course, ends with a cutscene. I'll always appreciate this late 90s 3D animation. I just can't get enough of it, which is why I was a little bit disappointed in this aspect of the game, because the ending scenes are just too short. This may have been due to a hardware or budget limitation, but I felt like I would just blink and miss the entire scene. This is the only time we physically see these characters doing anything, and it's only for like 15 seconds at the end of a playthrough. I appreciate the way they tried to weave these characters into a story that progresses as you play. I just wish there was more of it. Speaking of story progression, this is another way that V8 is a little bit different from the competition. There's a good amount of unlockable characters in Vigilante 8, and you'll get them by progressing certain characters through this bracket style layout in the story. And once they're unlocked, you can play their quest mode to get even more special unlocks. This unlock tree of sorts not only provides new content consistently, but it also gives you a reason to use the new content and play with characters that you might usually ignore. But if all of that content isn't good enough for you, you can use cheats. The late 90s were a gold mine for video game cheat codes, and Vigilante 8 is no exception.
Back in the day, anything that was unstable but fun, that that would jack up the game, we would just basically say it's a cheat. So buyer beware. You're gonna put in this cheat. Don't come complaining to us if it crashes or melts your disc or explodes your cartridge.
There's plenty of codes that'll alter the gameplay, unlock content, or continue your game if you don't have a memory card. This is also where I learned that the Nintendo 64 got the best port of the game.
Back then, every new version we had to be written from scratch. After we finished the PlayStation 1, we rolled on to the N64 version, and because we had a lot of the pieces already done, it was a much easier development cycle.
Including an exclusive map called Dreamland 64, this fever dream where Super Mario 64 was cross-pollinated with Conker's Bad Fur Day.
I was initially against. I thought it was so silly and out of place. It just didn't fit the V8 universe, but Peter had a vision for it, and I eventually ended up liking it, and actually everybody loved it in the end. So it was just like, all right, I was wrong. It's silly, but it works.
That's not all though, because the Nintendo 64 version also got a quest mode for the unlockable alien, as well as 4-player split screen.
We also got to add new modes like 2v2 or 3v1 or the survival mode. We also got to add a lot of fixes to not only like special weapons and some of the cars, things like the missions, which were a very last minute addition to the PlayStation 1. This version, we got to clean them up a little bit and even add the objectives to the radar.
Well, yeah, that's cool and all, but you could glitch the PS1 version to play your own soundtrack if you swap the discs during a match, so who's the real winner here? While I'm mentioning soundtracks, Vigilante 8 has a pretty good one. The music is mainly simple background tracks, but they're unique and varied enough to keep the game interesting. You have funky disco beats, hard rock, and some electronic melodies in between each genre to keep the pace consistent. And the soundtracks are fairly different between the Nintendo 64 version and the PlayStation version. The PlayStation version opts for realistic sounding instruments, while the Nintendo 64 version has a chiptune style to it. By the way, the Nintendo 64 version is like 10 megabytes, so the fact that they were able to cram this entire game on here at all is pretty impressive. The endings don't have the same cutscenes, and there's a little less dialogue like after a match ends, but I guess it's better to give that up for a more solid, polished game. The sound effects themselves sound like they came out of an asset library that literally every PlayStation game used, Twisted Metal included, so those are fine, I guess. And the voice acting?
Whoa, let's move to the groove.
The voice acting is definitely something.
Gonna sting you real good.
The biggest compliment that I feel I can give Vigilante 8 is that its aesthetic is unapologetically off the rails, but somehow it makes sense within this universe, and I love it. The gameplay can get a little jank, again, as par for the course in games from this era, but it's still fun and unique enough to stand out from its competition. It also got the chance to reach audiences that Twisted Metal literally just couldn't by releasing on multiple platforms, and from what I can tell, giving a solid experience to all of them. Even if only one of them got Super Dreamland 64 and an Alien campaign. It even got a Game Boy Color release that was developed by Vatican Entertainment, and you know that this game was a big deal because it came with vibration on the cartridge.
These were the days where Activision was just like, we got an IP, it's doing all right, let's throw it at every single platform and console and handheld out there that we can. And they came to us and they asked us if we could do it. And we were just like, nope, we're not going to do it. And then we just handed off all the resource materials we could. I mean, they obviously couldn't use our graphics or engine or anything, but do what you can on this tiny little handheld to get as close to V8 as you could.
It is without a doubt, most definitely one of the Game Boy Color games of all time. You know, I wasn't giving the Game Boy port a lot of credit here, but it's kind of surprising how faithful it actually is to the console ports. You have all your characters, you have the same maps with the same layouts, and it still kind of retains that Vigilante gameplay. And there's even sound clips in the game, which was really impressive for a Game Boy Color title. Probably still not my favorite though.
we wanted to get it on this and PlayStation and N64, and I'm sure if the Game Boy Advance was there too, we would have stuck it on that. And someone, I'm surprised we didn't say, let's make it a board game. Like, it was just like, let's scattershot this thing across the universe at this point.
You ready to roll the dice, bro?
After playing through Vigilante 8, I can confidently say that it was more than what some people would just consider a Twisted Metal clone. Sure, like many games from this era, it has its fair share of bugs and rough edges, but it brought unique ideas in a creative art direction that would captivate a cult following for years to come.
There are some diehard V8 fans out there, and one of the guys on my stream who I talk to pretty frequently, hey Wallace, he sent me over this clip saying the Gorillaz just did an interview like 2 years ago. You're going to want to see this. I look at the clip, and it's the band the Gorillaz saying they're on a podcast in Sweden, and they're talking to some guy, and the guy's like, "Do you play any video games?" And he goes, "No, I don't play any games except for Vigilante 8."
Are you a gamer yourself?
Well, to be honest, the only game I ever played was Vigilante 8. And I played that with Jamie. That's kind of how we bonded, and came up with Gorillaz while playing Vigilante 8. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's weird,
that's where it all started.
And I was just like, because they were like one of my favorite bands. Like I have their album around here. I occasionally tweet them going, hey, I'll send you a signed copy of Vigilante 8 for a signed copy of 19-2000, which is the original disc that they made. They say was based on Vigilante 8 because it has a little doom buggy on front with the rockets and everything.
If you look at like the first video for 19-2000, you look at that, it's like it might as well have been in the Vigilante game, you know what I mean?
But of course this isn't where the story ends, because that cult following wouldn't have to wait very long before they had something new to play. Fresh off the success of Vigilante 8, it didn't take long at all for the team to start cooking up a sequel, and Vigilante 8 was actually the perfect candidate. Vigilante 8 was a solid foundation with great ideas and a lot of room for improvement. But was the team ready for the task? Did they really feel like they had to get back in the stew and do some more work here?
The sequel I was definitely thinking about, because I was hoping for another sequel, but that was all based on sales numbers. Like Activision was driving that. Once we started getting numbers in, that the game was actually doing well and even pushing towards greatest hits, then the sequel was kind of a go.
It wouldn't take long for the fans to find out, because in a little over a year from the first release, we'd see the release of Vigilante 8 Second Offense. Jesus Christ, can you imagine seeing a 1-year release cycle today? Then again, COD's doing it, but I guess they're recycling a lot more assets now and putting out a worse product. Anyways, planning to make a good follow-up is one thing, but we're gonna have to jump into Second Offense to see if they really pulled it off. And damn, what an introduction you get. Vigilante hey buddy, you wanna be in the video? Second Offense picks up right after the events of the first game with a cinematic opening. Vigilante leader Convoy and the former Coyote Houston 3 are riding off into the sunset after a successful pushback to the Coyotes.
The story in the first one, we were dealing with an external animation studio. So we outsourced a lot of that, and I don't think we always got back what we wanted. So that was actually the one way we expanded our team, is he decided to hire on a couple of guys to do the cinematics in-house.
To the viewer of this cinematic opening, something strange is immediately apparent here. Hold up, there's a city with flying cars? Luxoflux predicted the stance scene? There's a Vigilante 8 universe with a Blade Runner style city? Am I going to be able to record this commentary with a 15-pound cat on me? After a Back to the Future time warp to 1977, Slick Glide and his gang pull up on Convoy to turn the tide of the previously lost war and make Omar the biggest player in the oil game. Look, there's a lot going on here, and there's a whole backstory segment that you can read if you really want to look into it. I'm not even going to pretend like I fully understand the whole deal here.
What was the inspiration for the time travel story? That was Peter's idea. He mainly handled the storylines. He wanted to push things into a more futuristic setting, because he loved things like Back to the Future, but it also opened up possibilities of adding robots and aliens and monkeys and just a lot of crazy stuff. He felt that it gave him more creative freedom in there. When I first heard this, I was just like, no, don't do it. Time travel, it never works out. You're opening a Pandora's box of storyline here.
All you really need to know is that oil still runs the world. Apparently EVs never took off, and now you can whip around in this sick-ass hover car.
He stuck to his guns and added that, so that we had a little more flexibility to do more crazy tech in the game itself.
That's pretty much the setup for Second Offense. France. It has the same outlaw versus sheriff story as the previous game, but with a whole lot of futuristic tech crash landing its way into the 70s. So with that wild ass introduction, you can immediately tell that you're in for something new here. But if the intro video didn't do it for you, maybe the menu screen slapping your little ear receptors with this banging ass funk track will get you in the mood. Keen listeners will also notice that this track has vocals to let you know that they weren't f***ing around. You think that Second Offense is worried about a music budget? This is the sequel, baby. We got AAA money now. We're Luxoflux. It ain't nothing to call up Activision and get a blank check signed off.
Both games had really good music in it. Like it really fit the game. We hired an outside guy Peter hired an outside guy to do it, and it was really good. Both times I just nailed it. In Second Offense, each character is supposed to have their own themed song. So most of those songs are themed after a character, but we didn't have enough money or time to get a track for every single character in there.
When you take a little peek into the game modes, you'll notice that we have a survival mode now to complement our main story in arcade mode, which is a game mode you already had if you played the original on Nintendo 64, which we'll check out a little bit later. First, we'll have to look at who we're riding with here, and man, Second Offense brings the goods.
Yes, we had a lot of the building blocks in there, but we also changed all the cars. Like Convoy now had a trailer on them. Houston was driving a tow truck, so I had to go in and retune all the vehicles, but also come up with brand new specials for all of them.
This might be the most unique set of characters that I've ever seen in a video game, period. It's the type of cast that reminds you of what makes video games so damn fun. You of course have your disco dudes, a police officer with what's totally not a Plymouth Prowler in 1976, a roller skater chick, and this quirky bus driver that looks like the kid from Barnyard, who now drives a prison bus instead of a school bus. Man, I guess the Coyotes really put him through it, huh?
There was a school, to be exact, had happened around this time when we were just finished up V8, and Bill Clinton comes on national TV and starts talking about video games being the source of violence in our society, and holds up the magazine ad for Vigilante 8 on TV, and Activision shits a brick.
Oh my god.
And rightfully so. So they're just like, we gotta do something about this now. The school bus has gotta go. And I'm just like, oh no, please don't. It's so colorful and it looks so good on the cover. So Peter, in his wisdom, kept the bus but changed it to a prison bus, and then wrote the story around that Molo went to prison, and that's why he now has a prison bus, because he broke out and stole it.
And an El Camino whipping Latina. But it doesn't stop there. You have what I could only describe as a trash goblin. Shout out to the guy that's outside of my door right now taking the trash, as well as an android robot outlaw with this sick ass stance car, and a NASA astronaut with a moon rover, because why not?
Yeah, this was back in the day when before everybody was suing for everything. Like, we didn't have NASA's permission to put that in the game.
This isn't even including your unlockable characters that have their own unique set of features, like this Japanese girl with this sick ass cyberpunk hover bike. It legitimately looks like something out of Cyberpunk 2077. It's so good. They didn't just bring the old characters back and sprinkle in a few new cars with a few new characters. They threw the whole kitchen sink at the f***ing roster, and I love it. There's so much variety and interesting lore going on here with the characters that I almost forgot to mention John Torque. Yeah, John Torque is in the game too. Thanks, John. Shout out to John if you're watching this video. So while the characters in Second Offense might genuinely be my favorite part of the game, of course we have more game to talk about here. When it comes to the quest mode, your driver will have a mapped out route that plays out through a series of levels based on who they pick, just like in the previous title. However, there's a bit more going on this time around. You only had 5 stages in the first game that were immediately available to you, and then 2 that you unlocked throughout the story. Of course, that's not counting Super Dreamland 64, the super cool level that you only got if you were a cartridge blower. But this time around in Second Offense, you get 8 playable stages right off the rip. These stages take place all across the US, including, very specifically, a NASA launch site in Florida. NASA was either sponsoring car combat at their testing site, or the developers were big space fans. Whose idea was it to put NASA in the game?
I think just the artist just put NASA in the game.
just because.
Yeah, I mean, today you'll get in trouble for that. It's like the Red Cross. You can't put a red cross on health packs anymore because the Red Cross will sue you. That's why all health packs have a green cross on them now.
And booting up into a level is where you'll finally get to experience the fruit of Luxoflux's labor. If you can think about an element that was lacking from the first game, it's probably been addressed here across the board.
The levels are 4 times, 5 times the size that they were. A whole bunch of new crazy specials in there that I came up with. I mean, to answer your question, like, what was the game plan? What was the roadmap here? It just kind of turned into more of everything.
Handling immediately feels good. Like, genuinely better than anything Twisted Metal was doing good. It's really surprising to me just how far ahead of its time this game was, considering how little it's talked about. Cars control more like, well, cars, and not just Hot Wheels without a steering rack that are getting slapped across the street.
Yeah, on top of that, then we have a whole upgrade system. You can collect salvage points when you total somebody and get a completely new car hot rod version. And there was a couple steps visually in between that. That was a lot with pretty much the same team as we had on the first one.
Physics and gravity are still kind of hit or miss though. But the driving experience doesn't stop at just a few handling tweaks. There's a variety of sections throughout every map that'll act as a hazard for the player. If you drive into the snow, naturally you're going to have a little trouble steering, and if you drove your car into the water, obviously it's going to sink to the bottom of the ocean, unlike the vehicles in Critical Depth, the game that I covered in my Twisted Metal developer games video. And this is where Luxaflux decided to innovate on their level design. Now you'll notice that there's a few blue pickups scattered throughout the map. Pick one up, and you'll see your car transform itself to handle the terrain better. Now you can slap on a pair of skis and snowshoes while you hit the slopes with your car. Or you can turn it into a boat to take the combat into the water. Or you can avoid the land altogether by turning it into a low gravity double jumping hovercraft, which is so damn useful for getting all of those items that I hated going for in the first game. And it's worth mentioning that this is on top of all of the secrets and interactive elements that you'll find throughout the map, just like in the first game.
That was one of the things I was just like, oh, why drive to the edge of water and just sink? Wouldn't it be cool if you could just drive out, get the attachment, just drive out into the water and continue combat out there? In the end, unfortunately, that never worked as intended. Our physics are pretty screwy at times, and you add attachments to it, and it is shenanigans like you would not believe.
Having these levels spiced up by these set pieces like the train moving through the steel mill or the alligators trying to bite you in the bayou adds both immersion and strategy to the game. It makes the world feel more lived in while also keeping the player on their toes. And then you have the interactive elements of the maps that seem to just kind of be put there for the fun of it, like parachuting from a rocket that you rode into orbit. To be clear though, all of these elements aren't just for show. They're tied into the way you complete your gameplay objectives too. Because just like the previous game's quest mode, you have secondary objectives to complete within the level. This time around though, it's more than just defending or attacking something. You still do that here, but now you also have quest items that are scattered throughout the level that you have to find.
Yeah, it went from just blow things up or don't blow things up to collect these 3 things, then blow something up, then push this trigger on this gator's butt or whatever. Like, it would have like 3 steps to them.
Sometimes it's just collecting, and sometimes you have to find these items and deliver them to a secondary location. And if I'm being honest with you, I didn't love this. I appreciate the added gameplay element, but I'm here to shoot shit up. Don't clip that and use that out of context. Not go on a glorified Easter egg hunt. Luckily, you can just ignore the extra objectives if you want, but I'm not sure if that blocks your progress from unlocking items throughout the story. Put it in the comments if you know, because I just ended up using cheats by the end of it. The cheat selection in this game is pretty good, by the way. Outside of the vehicle mods and quest items, however, the general gameplay here is about the same as the first game. Outside of one new weapon pickup, the flamethrower, the core gameplay is pretty much identical outside of any gameplay balancing tweaks, and the new character special weapons, of course. It's kind of surprising to me that outside of every other aspect of the game that was touched up, weapon pickups seem like they kind of got the short end of the stick here. Everything from the gameplay to the characters, the music, the visuals, the ending cutscenes, all were either extended or got a quality increase. But the weapon pickups, you get like 3, take it or leave it. I mean, I think it's more like 5 or 6. You get what I mean. If you were a fan of the first game and literally just wanted more, this is great. But if you expected a few new weapons outside of the specials, you might be a little disappointed. This could have been because of budget or time restrictions. I mean, the game was literally put together in a year, but I think that gameplay balancing could have also played a part in this too. Yeah, me from the past, those actually were the culprits. Idiot. Dummy.
I went off the rails with adding an extra weapon and an extra combo to all of the weapons on top of that. I regret adding the flamethrower and those third combos. It was too much for players to keep in their head. Even when I'm streaming, I'm just like, what is that 4th combo? Like, I don't remember.
David talks a lot here in the interview about how the team got really ambitious and there was a lot of burnout, so maybe the better option was to not make it as complex as possible here. The main gameplay element separating Vigilante 8 from its competition is the fact that you can chain together attacks that'll give you damage multipliers. This also includes the fact that you can fire these pickups in different ways with different button combinations, so in reality, it's almost like getting 3 weapons in one. Maybe it would have taken a lot of development time to implement these new weapons in a meaningful way, and this is the gameplay element that separates Vigilante 8 from its competition, but it has a downside. I guarantee you that thousands of people played this game without even realizing that the weapons had alternate fire modes. You gotta remember that Vigilante 8 came from a time when games explained virtually nothing to you. If you weren't sure how to make your way through a level or get past that final boss, you were doing one of two things: picking up a strategy guide or calling a hotline to get help. Hell, I'm pretty sure that when I played this back in the day, I didn't even have a manual with the game to show me this kind of stuff.
I mean, I would say the majority of the people who rented the game or got it secondhand had no idea how to do the combos or whammies. I do wish we had the time and the forethought to make a tutorial for the game, explain some of those mechanics, but also Activision wasn't a real fan of rentals back then. You could rent it multiple times from that store that had bought it, and that could be 10, 20, 30 sales that we didn't get for the game.
Hell, even playing it today, I didn't realize that the button combinations were a thing. I only thought to look for it once I got curious about how finishing moves worked on cars once you total them. And even then, I'm sure there was a lot of people that were like, oh, well, I guess if I want to total them, I have to use my special move, not just put in a button combination with the rockets that I have in my inventory.
Also back then, just having some hidden features were pretty desirable for games, because then we could use them as exclusive tidbits for various game magazines, and then in return they would feature, us on their cover or have a big section about us in their magazine kind of explaining things. Not to mention the strategy guides that we could sell too, which I ended up writing a couple of them.
And it's pretty easy for me to look that stuff up now, but what about 20 years ago when I didn't have access to the internet, when we didn't have photo-scanned copies of all these game manuals? Maybe the game was just a little too complex for my little brain, but either way, there's no point in crying over spoiled milk. And we aren't done talking about Vigilante 8.
Later on, I had the idea of adding tips to the loading screen for the N64. In the end, we ended up revealing those for Second Offense, but I wish I could go back in time and maybe add them to the first one, but maybe not. It did lead to some pretty cool strategy guides.
Outside of the quest mode, that of which also has like double the amount of cutscenes from the first game, you have your arcade and survival modes. And this is pretty much like the in-game content for Second Offense, because the story is cool and all, but this is an arcade shooter at the end of the day. And just like any good COD or fighting game, you might enjoy the story, but you're sticking around for the gameplay loop. And that's no different here in Second Offense. The arcade mode immediately feels like a different game because for the first time, all of the attention isn't on you. Every player in the map fends for themselves, so you'll constantly hear them exchanging gunfire, and it gets pretty damn hectic watching the other players destroy the map. This might give you the impression that the arcade mode is a little bit easier than the other modes, considering that you're not the only target, but I genuinely think that the arcade mode might be harder than the main story. These spots get pretty aggressive. It's like when a group of dogs can't get to their target, so they just start fighting each other, but then they go straight to it when they see an opening. Ironically, I'd say that the survival mode feels easier than anything.
You think survival was easier?
In the survival mode, you'll pick your car and opponent, similar to what you do in the arcade mode. You start off by facing one opponent, and as you play, the number of enemies coming after you grows to 3 at a time, which is probably the limit they were able to place into a level before the frame rate started dropping. Oh man, PlayStation limitations, huh? As you can probably guess, the goal is to eliminate as many opponents as possible while staying alive as long as you can, which for me was until I started getting bored to the point that I just let them kill me. Now this is gonna vary a bit based on the options you chose, but I found the survival mode to just be a cakewalk on the nuclear plant. Maybe it was because I was in the CP car and nobody wanted to get near me. Maybe if the map had a school zone within 500 feet of me, it would have been a little more difficult.
I would think that survival would have been harder because they keep coming in with fresh weapon loadouts, as opposed to arcade where they could fire off a bunch and then just drive around trying to look for stuff. Mileage may vary depending on player, but I think after about the 5th car, survival gets harder.
Now, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the survival mode is you versus everybody else as they team up against you. But sometimes it felt a little hard to tell because the AI kept killing themselves and getting stuck in the environment, which made my job pretty easy. I also found health and weapon pickups to be given out a lot more liberally than any other modes I played, which made it a lot easier to stay alive. Of course, I get it, you're in the survival mode, you need this stuff to survive, but maybe it was a little too easy. Maybe I'm just too good at the game. Yeah, that's what it is. I compared the arcade and survival modes on a different map with different enemies, and the difficulty still felt slightly skewed.
That's interesting. So in arcade mode, you're probably fighting 4 people right off the bat. You're getting a lot more incoming fire, where in survival mode, we start off with 1, you kill them, then 2 come in, then 3 until it goes up to the max.
It kind of felt like playing with a cousin that just got done beating the shit out of me in the game and decided to let me win a few rounds to make me feel better. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe the survival mode is really hardcore. Maybe I just have my game balancing tinfoil hat on. I don't know. I think that's pretty much it for the game modes, with the exception of split screen multiplayer, which is pretty pretty self-explanatory, I guess. All right, I'm gonna be honest, I really did want to try out the split screen, but I didn't have anybody to play it with. You got your versus, co-op arcade, and co-op story modes. Second Offense is still a little rough around the edges. Maybe you could use a few game patches, but overall I'd say it's a pretty massive improvement over the first game.
Everybody likes this version the most. I hear the most about Second Offense. Like, this is like everybody's childhood memory here. And I actually thought Second Offense was not as good as the first one. We tried to add too much and it was too unpolished as a result of it. But this is the one everybody remembers.
And while I had a great time with Second Offense over here in the States, it turns out I wasn't the only audience for it. Interestingly enough, it turns out that Vigilante 8 would take a road trip of its own overseas to see a Japanese release under the name Vigilante 8 Second Battle. It's worth mentioning that the original game also got released in Japan and other regions, but it seems that virtually nothing was changed in those versions, but in this one it's a different story. And this wasn't just a simple copy and paste job either. This was a full localization including unique names, translations, and voice lines.
It's like one of my Japanese animes.
As far as I know, there really isn't any changes when it comes to asset design or censorship, but there are a few notable mentions where you can tell a difference. When you first boot up the Japanese version of Second Offense, you'll notice that it uses a different image for the title screen, and if we jump into the options menu, the difficulty seems to be set to easy by default. Of course, any line of text outside of the map and texture assets has been translated, but there's something that kind of surprised me when you jump into the character selection, because you'll notice the text behind the character has also been translated. I imagine they had to render completely new image assets to do this, which is a surprising amount of work for what could be considered a niche title. But the most surprising translation of all is that they hired all new voice acting talent to dub the entire game. This includes the chant you hear when selecting a new character or using special moves, the results screen dialogue, and most notably, the endings. Not only did they dub new voice lines for the characters, but they added lines of text on certain scenes to give more context as to what's going on. It appears this localization was done by Syscom Entertainment, and while I can't find a lot about them, judging by the credits they're listed for, I can only imagine they provided the translation for this game. And while I can't speak to the quality of this translation, I know it's kind of hard to believe, but I don't know any Japanese. It's clear that a lot of effort was put into the anime version of this game.
From what I think I've heard, we did better than Twisted Metal there, though. I think it was because we were more colorful and bright, and they were very dark and dreary and angsty on their cover art. And I think it was purely the visuals of our covers being bright that probably gave us a leg up in that environment.
Somebody over at Syscom really wanted the Japanese audience to get their hands on this, and I bet you there's a few Japanese Vigilante 8 fans out there that we just may never meet. I'd just like to imagine somewhere you have a small cult following of the Japanese audience. It's totally into this weird niche game that takes place in America.
Hey, come into my stream. I'll talk to you guys. I'd love to hear that we made an impact in Japan.
It's crazy to think about how such an oddball title like Car Combat across America could find its way all the way overseas to a niche Japanese audience. Unfortunately though, this is probably the last Vigilante 8 game that'll ever see this kind of reach. After the release of Second Offense, it seemed like the series was left as nothing more than roadkill. After they released this comic book that I just found out about, yeah, that's the thing. It seemed that the series had its moment in the limelight, but it was time for the studio to move on to other projects. By 2010, the parent company Aluxa Flux, Blizzard Entertainment, decided it was time to shut down the studio.
The numbers started coming in, and we were figuring out that auto combat was on the down. Our team wanted to switch gears. Activision wasn't too keen on having another V8 come out again anytime soon, but then I think we got approached by LucasArts to basically make an auto combat.
So yeah, I didn't know about this Star Wars reskin of Vigilante 8. There was definitely some budget put behind this one. The intro for this is just incredible. There's some interesting things going on here. It plays pretty smooth. It seems like the physics were tweaked a good bit. It seems they stuck to the source material fairly well. There's a cute little intro, like the intro of the movies that's explaining the whole, oh, well, now we got this car combat entertainment thing going on with the intergalactic galaxies having some... I only read it once, like last night, and I can't remember what the whole story is. But yeah, it's a thing.
And honestly, Peter probably he knows the story better than I would. I'm just kind of going off memory. We convinced them, or they convinced us, or Activision convinced them to make a Star Wars Demolition using the Vigilante 8 engine.
They added a high stakes game mode where you can wager currency to get more currency. I don't really know what else you do with the currency, but that's a thing that's there. You can play as Boba Fett. He's got some funny legs that kind of flare around. Look at his funny legs.
So we have a Star Wars game that's basically V8 with the Star Wars theme slapped on it. And so we actually squeezed out one more auto combat, but it was not V8.
And despite it being on the same engine and being generally the same concept, it plays a good bit differently from Vigilante 8. Like if you want to shoot your machine guns, aka your lasers, or your specials like your rockets, you can actually hold the trigger down and do like a special attack. But now you have to recharge your shields and recharge your ammunition. And now weapon pickups float around the map and you can pick it up, and it plays pretty smoothly, but it's also kind of weird. It's kind of a neat addition. And it's kind of weird that Sony put this on the PlayStation Store, but nobody else is putting Vigilante 8 on the storefronts. So yeah, that's a game that exists, I guess.
After Star Wars Demolition, I went off to go work on the Twisted Metal series, did that for a while, and then came back to work on the True Crime series with them. It performed well, but not well enough. So that ultimately led to Luxoflux being shut down.
But while this was the end of Luxoflux, it wasn't the end of Vigilante 8. 2 years prior to this shutdown, a different company going by the name of Isopod Labs would release Vigilante 8 Arcade as a budget title for the Xbox Live Arcade.
And I guess Peter and Adrian and maybe Carrie, if I remember right, decided to spin up a new company.
This was an Xbox storefront that allowed smaller indie developers to offer up their indie projects to a larger console audience. And if you know anything about the Xbox Live Arcade, you can see where this was going.
They went back to their bread and butter and approached Activision and said, hey, can we make a discount version budget title of Vigilante 8, and they secured the rights to do it.
Where this game is not going is anywhere near my hard drive because I have absolutely no interest in playing this. Maybe as a $5 throwaway game, this would have been fun for about an hour or so, but it's clearly a shell of what the earlier two games provided. The UI and overall art direction of the game just looks bad, if not non-existent. I'm not really sure why this exists, but maybe that grave they were digging up was best left untouched.
I was currently working on Ratchet & Clank. I would occasionally dip into the office and give them notes. I kind of wish I was more involved in that project. It didn't do too well. They made their money. It allowed them to keep that company afloat a little bit to do a couple more projects. But then after that, I think even Isopod shut down.
But you know what they say about demand for a game. If the publishers and developers won't do it, the fans will. Yeah, we're still not done talking about Vigilante 8. And this is where we get into the most surprising thing that I found while working on this video. Well, I say found, but Goodrich Games has been streaming this the past few days, and that's what put this on my radar.
Oh, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people streaming out there. Now a new Unity version has surfaced.
There has been a fan-created PC port of Vigilante 8 into the Unity engine in the works for the past year or so, and it seemingly made some great progress. If you go to this website that I'm going to link in the description, you'll be greeted with what looks like an official launch page for Vigilante 8 Second Offense, as if it was just coming out in 2024. And if you click that little download button, you'll receive a Google Drive link with the game and a RAR file. Drag and drop the files in a folder, and you'll be off to the races. Pretty simple.
So they took the base game, he's put it out there for free. Hopefully he doesn't get in trouble with Activision.
A lot of the links on this website don't work, besides one that lead directly to Activision's social media, which is ironic because I don't think Activision is involved with this project at all. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that despite Activision being plastered on the website and on the game splash screen, I can't find anything that supports the idea that Activision is supporting this fan-made project that's providing private Google Drive download links. The website even says Vigilante 8 official site in my search history, with no mention at all that this is a fan project on the website's home screen. All that is to say, do your own research and download this at your own discretion. Let me be clear that I'm not knocking what these guys are doing at all. This is an awesome project, seriously. But if the execs over at Activision see a fan-made project representing themselves as the official thing, they might not be too happy. And I hope that doesn't end up being the case because this is really cool.
It's so good.
Anyways, now that we have those disclaimers out of the way, let's crack this bad boy open. So upon booting the game up, you get this weird splash screen, and I wasn't really sure if I was doing this right, but after it ran a few automatic updates, I was greeted by the start menu. Now, I wasn't too sure what I was getting into here. I just downloaded a sketchy ass RAR file that I had to dig around to find on an unofficial website. You know, typically when it comes to fan-made projects like this, there's other people covering it and there's like tutorials on how to install it and do this, that, and the other. There was none of that I could find for this game. But if we're using the Xbox Live Arcade release as any measure of quality, this would easily pass as a legit release if I didn't know any better. I mean, the little V8 logo is moving around, so that has to count for something, right? Upon pressing start, the game prompts you that it will automatically save your progress before slickly transitioning you over to the main menu. You can also navigate this with a controller, by the way. It just has controller support out the box. You remember when getting controllers to work on PC titles was a coin flip on whether or not it had real support for it or not? And once I got into the main menu, it was at this point I realized I was in for something special. But little did I know just how damn special this actually was.
This is fun. This is good times right here.
Scrolling around here, you'll immediately notice that you have all the game modes you'd expect. Before starting a game, you can even head into the options menu and change the difficulty, just like starting a real game. Although maybe that should just be there front and center. I don't know. So I decided to start out by opening up the arcade mode, and this is where you can choose between both Vigilante 8 and Second Offense maps. I picked out my level, my car, my enemies, and this is when I was instantaneously spawned into the game. I hope you weren't looking forward to the pre-game hints because there's no loading times here. Keep in mind that I'm going into this PC port fresh off of the first two PlayStation games, so I have a pretty good idea of how the game should feel and play, which is why my jaw just about hit the f***ing floor 30 seconds into my first game.
It turns out the Vigilante 8 Discord I'd frequent, people would ask me a bunch of questions like, oh, what got cut? What would you change? And I like just started rattling off stuff like, oh, I always wanted to do this with Dave's flying saucers. I always wanted to, you know, be able to whammy with a turbo RAM or things like that. This guy who was turning V8 into the online Unity version, I guess went through all my notes and started incorporating them into the game. So I'm seeing all this stuff I always wanted in the game that we ran out of time to do.
This isn't just Vigilante 8, but recreated on a new engine using the same maps and cars. This is literally Vigilante 8, but with a buttery smooth frame rate and the sharpest visuals that I've seen yet. The cars drive like you'd expect, the weapons still stack, fire, and target like they should, including special weapon combos, and the maps play just like they were designed. That means you can still ride the blimp in Vegas or take the rocket into orbit at the launch site. I don't know if you can actually do this in this version, I didn't try. Just take my word for it. This might be some of the most fun that I had making this entire video, because the PC port just runs so smoothly, and it's easy to forget that this is a fan port of a 24-year-old game.
He fixed the hover pods and the water attachments on Second Offense, so they work like I wanted them to. It's pretty smooth now, and it's a lot of fun to play the game in this kind of fresh lens.
All of the little details are here too, like the way the music lowers at the end of a match to make room for your character's in-game vocals. Or the description that pops up under the vehicle selection screen. This port even includes online multiplayer, complete with matchmaking. Unfortunately, I didn't get this working, but there are videos of what I assume is the project team running a 12-person free-for-all, which is just wild to think about. We're talking about a game that was designed to, at max, have 4 players in a game at any time. Of course, the game isn't perfect. It wasn't perfect when it went into this to begin with, and it's still got a ways to go when it comes to adding content. It seems that there's more vehicles in this port than what I've seen, but I only have access to the Second Offense characters. If there's an unlock all method to this game that anybody knows, let me know, because there's virtually zero information on this game right now. I've just been kind of winging it here. That missing content also goes for the quest mode for the original characters. I'm not sure if the ending movies are in this or if the quest objectives are intact, because that info isn't really there at the start of a game. There's also a player stats menu that I can't seem to access, so maybe that's another one of those things that's work in progress. The UI isn't exactly my cup of tea, but obviously all this stuff is in early development, and it looks pretty damn good for that, all things considered.
I hope he keeps making it, you know, and keeps working on it, and he gets a lot of stuff in there. I'm tempted to give him more notes and be like, hey, can we get some teams in there? Can we get team whammies in there? What about turbo RAM? You know, things like that would be a lot of fun to add.
It's pretty insane that any of this works as well as it does. I have no idea how they did this, and maybe in the future it's something we can take a deeper dive into. Maybe we can play some multiplayer, assuming that this whole thing doesn't ultimately get shut down by Activision. Hell, Microsoft owns Activision now, right? Xbox loves stuff like this. Hey Xbox, I know you're watching this video. Support this project, give it a full-scale release, put it on Game Pass, everybody's gonna love it. It's a no-brainer. I mean, hey, you greenlit that pile of dog shit on the live arcade. Why not give this passion project a shot?
Maybe I can tweet Phil Spencer and be like, hey, you want another V8 on the cheap? I I know some guys.
If you just want a taste of what some of that Vigilante 8 deathmatch is like, your best way to experience it might be through this PC port. As I'm editing this video, it seems the team dropped a new update and added Super Dreamland, so it's definitely worth keeping an eye on this project. I'll also link their YouTube channel in the description. Otherwise, Second Offense on whatever you want to play it on is still a good option. There's even a disc swap trick that'll unlock the original Vigilante 8 levels in Second Offense if you're playing the PlayStation version. Who's getting the Last Laugh Now cartridge users? It's probably still them, because I think there was a cheat code to unlock the levels on that too. Man, this video is going off the rails.
Is V8 better than Twisted Metal?
That was supposed to be the ending question. I forgot
Okay,
I forgot to not tell you about that one. That was supposed to be a zinger. This has been a hell of a project. Huge thanks to Goodrich Games for joining me once again to talk about his development experience. You can check out his channel in the description where he goes into great detail about his experience with the games. He's typically live streaming over there every week, so if you had a question about the games in this video that didn't get answered, you can probably just ask him over there. Is Vigilante 8 better than Twisted Metal?
Oh, come on, man. I've worked on both. It's like asking me which one of my kids is my favorite kid.
Yeah, but you do have a favorite kid. You just don't want to admit it.
So this is being taped, so I'm not gonna say anything. They're both good in their own ways, and I think they both fill different niches. V8 is more casual and colorful and player friendly. Twisted Metal is the Quake of auto combat. Dark, heavy, accurate. I can hear you behind that building. I'm gonna throw a skill shot around this plane and blow you up or whatever. There was definitely a market for both of these for sure.
There's so many things that we talked about that I just didn't have the time or the space to include in this video, but if you want to check that out, I'll have the full interview up for channel members early, aka right now if you're watching this. Otherwise it'll be up soon, and it's definitely worth a watch if you're into this or you want to know more about David Goodrich and the development history of this series. This has been a hell of a project, man. Thank you guys for being patient with me. Thank you again to David for taking the time to come on and talk about this game with me. It was a lot of fun. Make sure if you enjoyed the video to like and subscribe so I know you want to see more of it. And check out David too, it's definitely worth a watch. He talks about stuff all the time on his live streams, a ton of invaluable information. It's amazing.
God, I sound much better when I get close to the mic like this. I'll do some sex lines now.
Otherwise, hopefully I'll see you guys again later. It's very hot in this room, I'm melting. Oh God. You think that Second Offense is worried about a music vote? Fuck. NASA astronaut with a...